Testing, testing. All right. Well, hello, everybody. It's so exciting to see such a nice crowd for tonight's event, to have you all here with us to commemorate the Kingfish on what would have been his 130th birthday. And we have a couple other things going on. We have a brand new exhibit that just opened entitled 2 Minutes to Midnight and the Architecture of Armageddon. So for that exhibit, we invite guests to come face to face with present nuclear realities while also offering a look into the collective American psyche during the Cold War era. So if you didn't get a chance to see that tonight, no worries. We're going to have that through October, but be sure to come here and check it out. And we'll have some programs to complement that exhibit in October. So the reason we're here tonight, thank you all so much for joining us. Of course, this is a Secretary of State museum, and we are very, very happy to host this event to celebrate and remember Huey P. Long. For this event, we have asked Dr. Gabriel Mathy to lend us his expertise and give us some information on Huey P. Long and his lasting influence in Louisiana. Dr. Gabriel Mathy is an assistant professor at American University in Washington, D.C. He completed his PhD at the University of California, Davis, and received bachelor degrees in economics and international studies at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. His research focuses on the macroeconomics of the Great Depression and economic history, including the problem of long-term unemployment with the Great Depression, as well as international aspects of the Great Depression. Dr. Mathy has also studied Huey P. Long and his rule and influence over Louisiana. And we were first introduced to Dr. Mathy here at the Old State Capitol a year ago when he gave a talk at the Louisiana Historical Association on Huey P. Long. So after that talk, we wanted to invite him to come here for our Kingfish's birthday to also share some more knowledge with everybody. So without further ado, I'd like to go ahead and hand it over to Dr. Gabriel Mathy, and thank you all so much again for coming out.
Thanks very much for a very kind introduction. I'm really happy to be here. It's really wonderful to talk about Huey P. Long. You know, I've had the chance to do research on several aspects of Long's life. And so it's really nice to be able to present this to you. So I'm going to focus on Huey Long's life for his birthday and how it relates to Baton Rouge. So we're going to talk about his life as it relates to this city. So, of course, today is Long's birthday. He would be 130 today. And so, you know, he's going to have a lasting influence. You know, I got interested in him as, you know, I think he's one of the most fascinating Americans. He's a true original and one of the most brilliant politicians in American history. So let's start with the birthplace of the Longs. So the Longs are going to be from Winfield, Louisiana, a fairly small town in northern Louisiana. And so you wouldn't expect that he would become what he would become, propelling himself to the governor's office, to become senator, and perhaps to become president if he had lived. So Long is going to say that he comes from a desperately poor background, being born in a log cabin. But in fact, he's really born in a fairly comfortable house, more middle class as things go. But as we'll see, he really does have a lot of deprivation in his life, a lot of precarity. So even though he's not desperately poor, he's still going to suffer from the conditions of the time, that he's going to have a hard time getting an education and making it. He's going to eventually be able to do so, but I think that's really going to shape his life. So here's Long as a schoolboy. He's in the upper right. And so he's going to be a voracious reader. He's homeschooled for a while. He's going to go to the library and read every book he can. He really loves the Bible. And you see that, you know, kind of biblical lessons are going to influence his view of the world, that you should primarily look out for the poor and downtrodden. And so his influences are not from, say, the Populist Party of the time or socialist candidates, but really from biblical principles. He's also going to read voraciously about two figures. One is Napoleon, so you can see who he idolizes, these kind of transformative figures. And also, oh, you're not seeing the PowerPoint. Okay, sorry. Oh, right. So he's reading everything he can about Napoleon and also the Reconstruction era governor of Louisiana, Henry Clay Warmoth. So this didn't really come out, but I think this would have been really politically damaging. But he sees him as another transformational leader, I think, that's trying to make Louisiana better, even though a Reconstruction era governor would have been very unpopular at the time. So he's going to do very well in high school. He's going to easily go through all the grades. And there was supposed to be only through 11th grade. He's going to petition to remove the requirement for 12th grade. And he's so aggressive in this, for his insolence, he gets expelled. So he never receives a high school diploma. And as we'll see, he's actually not really going to receive any diplomas. So he's going to kind of bulldoze his way through. So in high school, Huey Long is going to visit Baton Rouge. So as far as I can tell, this is the first time he visits in 1909. And he's in a debate competition. As you can imagine, he does very well in this. And he actually is going to win a scholarship to Baton Rouge. So he's a small, kind of small town country boy. And he's impressed by Baton Rouge, all the modern amenities, though in the end, he's going to be taken in more by New Orleans. But he sees paved streets, electricity, and so on, all the modern amenities. And he sees Louisiana State University, and he really wants to go there. He gets this scholarship to LSU, but even though he's not from desperately poor circumstances, the scholarship is not going to cover his room and board or his books. And so he can't afford to go. So even though he gets a scholarship for tuition, the other costs are going to impede him from going. And so you can tell that that's going to have an influence on his life. He's going to be really interested in investing in LSU, which he will never attend, but he sort of, I think he sees it as something, a lost opportunity. And he's also going to invest in textbooks, as we'll see. So he can't go to college, he can't afford it, and so he's going to have to become a traveling salesman. So this could have been his path in life, to eventually just become a traveling salesman. So this is him. He goes to around selling codoline shortening door to door. He's going to often again cite the Bible in talking about how lard and pig is unchristian from the Old Testament. This is where he's going to meet his wife Rose, and he's again going to be in very precarious circumstances. He's having a hard time making ends meet. He can't afford the money to pay the officiant with Rose. He's sometimes having to sell the clothes off his back to eat or use his clothes as collateral. He often has to sleep on the streets. So he's really living in desperate situations. And we can see how his potential was potentially wasted. And he would have just made a simple life as a traveling salesman. So his mother wants him to be a Baptist minister. Probably could have had a lot of success at that with his silver tongue. But he's only going to last one semester. He sees that law is probably a better path, which it is going to be. So his oratorial skills are not going to go towards being a preacher. So he's going to attend Oklahoma Baptist University. So again, he's not attending LSU. He's attending another institution. Then he's going to switch to law. He's going to go to the University of Oklahoma College of Law. But he's got a hard time. So, Huey Long is from northern Louisiana. It's a bit more like the rest of the South, but Huey Long likes to have a good time. He has certain appetites, so he's going to like lots of drinking. He likes eating, and he's going to enjoy gambling. And so the Oklahoma gambling halls are going to distract him. So he only lasts one semester. So then he's going to try to return, but ironically, he's going to attend Tulane. So he still isn't attending a Baton Rouge educational institution. So in 1914, he's going to enroll in Tulane Law School. But notice that he doesn't have a high school degree. He doesn't have an undergraduate degree, a bachelor's degree. And now he's going to attend classes for 1 year at Tulane Law School. He's not going to finish his degree there either. After a year, he's going to convince the people administering the bar exam to let him take it after a year. He kind of confuses them, saying that he needs to take it early, but they didn't know that he'd only taken 1 year of coursework. But he's such a quick learner that he's able to easily pass the bar with only 1 year of classes at Tulane. And so now he's on a track to really make something of himself. But again, he still hasn't made it to Baton Rouge. So he's going to move to Shreveport in 1918. So first he moves back to Winfield. He starts a law practice. He's going to look out for the common man. Then he's going to move to Shreveport. But again, he still hasn't made it to Baton Rouge. So on the back of this law career, he's going to make a name for himself going after Standard Oil, the big oil company, his big villain of the day. And so he's going to run for railroad commissioner, which is, you might not know it today, but it's a kind of major regulatory position, a position where you can really stick it to the big businesses of the day. So you can regulate railroads. He's able to regulate Standard Oil as well. And so he's going to make a name for himself. On the back of his previous law practice, now he's going to be railroad commissioner, trying to try to protect the common people of Louisiana from big business, at least in his eyes. So, he's making a name for himself. He's moving up. And then in 1924, he's going to run for governor. So again, he's a kind of small town official. He's basically a political unknown. And even so, he's able to place a very strong third. And so it's clear that this is someone who's destined for a meteoric rise, right? He's gone from being a traveling salesman to passing the bar, being a successful lawyer, a successful state official. And Huey had talked to Rose, his wife, and explained his path to his plans for his life, and he would be a state official and then governor and then senator and then president. As we'll see, he only makes it to Senate, the Senate, before he dies. But we can see that he's on a path to actually achieve this very ambitious plan for his life. So in 1924, he's going to lose, but it's pretty clear that, given that he can finish third, he's probably going to win eventually. And then in 1928, he's going to run again. So notice that he's still not in Baton Rouge. His state headquarters are going to be at the Roosevelt Hotel in New Orleans. And so he was taken in by Baton Rouge. It's a lot more modern than Winfield. But of course, he really likes New Orleans. There's a lot going on. One of the biggest cities in the United States at the time. Lots of fun to be had, lots of drinking, good food, and all that. So he's going to run. Notice that it's the Democratic primary election, because in Louisiana at the time, the Democratic Party was just so dominant that a Republican could never win. So if you won the Democratic primary, you essentially won, because the Republicans had no chance. So he's going to win pretty easily. He's able to navigate the splits between North and South Louisiana. Despite the South having more population and generally producing more politicians, he's able to get a lot of support from Southern Louisiana too. So there had been a governor's mansion in Baton Rouge. It's built in 1857. State purchases it in 1887. And then Long is going to demolish it. So remember, he's elected in 28, and then he's going to be inaugurated in 29. And so he's immediately going to try to make everything new for himself. So, he really wants to change all the state institutions to have a new Louisiana. And so he's going to build a new governor's mansion. So he says, this thing is too old. It's a symbol of the old order, the old elites. And Huey Long wants to usher in a new populist vision for Louisiana. So he's going to build this, which is now called the Old Governor's Mansion, because there's a newer one. But if you notice, it looks a lot like the White House, much more than the previous iteration. And so this is going to be where you can see his ambitions for the presidency. So, he's kind of the president in Baton Rouge already. But even so, he has to be in Baton Rouge for business, for the state's business, because it's the capital, but he's going to have a mansion in New Orleans as well. All right, so this old state capitol, where you are right now, a beautiful building, but again, is a symbol of the old order. It has kind of older architecture. This is again going to represent a move away from where New Orleans had been the capital. There's a desire to move concentrated power away from the biggest city. So the capital's moved to Baton Rouge, and the state capital is constructed. It's actually burned in 1862 during the Civil War. And then it comes back in 1882, but it is pretty old by the time you get to the 1920s. So there had been talk about building a new state capital, but of course, Long is going to want to build his own. So he's going to build a monumental state capitol, which is the current one in use today. It has Art Deco architecture, which was kind of cutting edge and modern at the time. It's based on Nebraska's state capitol, but it's a little bit taller, a few feet taller. Huey always had to be the best, but you can see it represents his ambitions, right? It's not kind of squat like the castle-like structure of the old Capitol, or the kind of classical architecture with the domes that many state capitals have. So this one is really showing his ambitions of reaching to the sky. So this is going to be constructed fairly quickly. It's done by 1931, and it pulls out all the stops. He has, marble comes in from far away. He's got all kinds of different types of stone, and so if you go in there, you can see that really no expense was spared for Huey's capital. So also in Baton Rouge, Long is going to invest massively in LSU. It had been moved to Baton Rouge under previous administrations. So I'm just going to give you a little taste of this. But there's a great new book out by Robert Mann on Kingfish U about Huey Long and LSU. So, again, he never attends there. He never gets a degree from LSU, but he really takes it into his heart as a sign of the new Louisiana, that he's going to really invest in things like infrastructure that we've seen. He's building new buildings, and he's also going to invest in education. And so LSU is going to be the centerpiece. He wants to make it one of the best universities in the country. And so it had been underfunded. It had been, kind of minor university, only known locally, with the top public universities being in the North, especially in the Midwest, places like the University of Wisconsin. But like many Southern states with low levels of public funding, LSU had few faculty that were not very prestigious and didn't produce a lot of graduates. So that's all going to change with Huey Long. He's going to put in massive investments in LSU. He's going to hire lots of faculty, and LSU is going to become one of the top public universities in the nation. It doesn't overpass some of the top northern universities, but it's one of the best public universities in the South, outside of some of the older ones like the University of Virginia. So among the Deep South universities, it was one of the best by far. So he's going to invest massively in plant. Also, he's going to invest in new buildings. So here's the Huey Long Field House, which is very famous, getting a kind of very modern, top quality swimming pool that all the LSU students can use. There's also, of course, going to be the famous expansion of Tiger Stadium. And so Huey Long really focuses on the football program. He wants to make it one of the best. Before, they had always gotten beaten by Tulane. And this is really when LSU becomes one of the top football programs in the nation, something that it's continued to dominate the nation in. And so, there were limits on how much you could spend on a stadium. So famously, he adds dorms under the bleachers, and trying to look for this citation, it seems a bit more complicated than that. But it does seem that it was convenient to build dorms in the bleachers. And this helped explain why there was it helped justify this massive investment in a larger stadium. So Huey even writes songs for LSU, some that continue to this day. So it was Touchdown for LSU, the LSU Cadets March, and Darling of LSU. So he's going to write them with Castro Carrazzo, who's going to help him write these down. So you can see just how deeply he has affection for LSU. And so, this is really going to be one of the centerpieces of his administration. So something else that he's doing, not focused just on Baton Rouge, is the road building program. So Louisiana had very few paved roads outside of the cities. As I mentioned, there's not really going to be paved roads in Winfield when he's a child. There's some paved roads in Baton Rouge and New Orleans. And the few paved roads that there are often are on top of levees. And so he really wants to modernize the state by building lots of modern paved roads and by making free bridges. And so the bridges especially are going to be especially deficient, as we'll see. But this is his plan for road building. And so you can see a lot of them follow modern roads, the kind of roads you might expect. But you can see there's also roads in the Southwest, in Acadia, and in the Northeast, which are less populated. So he was clear to build a few miles in every parish. So that way people would see how great the roads were, and then they would push to finish the program because his funding was limited there. So, he's going to build roads in every parish, even in some that are fairly lightly populated, but he's also going to build roads that are between major population centers. So you can see some of his accomplishments here in a postcard after his death. You've got the state capitol, and there will be a bridge built in Baton Rouge, but arguably the one in New Orleans is more important. And so before long, the southernmost bridge over the Mississippi was in Vicksburg. So there was no way to cross by car in Baton Rouge, between East Baton Rouge and the west side of the Mississippi. And so you'd have to take an auto ferry. So obviously this is extremely inefficient, right? But, there was very little public funding for infrastructure. And so also New Orleans had no bridges across the Mississippi, which made it very difficult to get around. And so the Huey P. Long Bridge in New Orleans was planned and began construction under Long's governorship and his senatorship when he still controlled the state effectively. So this one is arguably more important than the Baton Rouge Bridge, but both of them I think were important to try to modernize the state. So you had an auto ferry across the Mississippi. It did continue after the bridge was built, but that was your only option before the Long administration. And so you can see how this program would have been popular given just how bad the infrastructure was at the time, right? If you think about, how could you have prevented a populist demagogue like Long from coming in? Well, the previous administrations would have needed to make these kind of basic investments in things like infrastructure and education, given that it was very easy for a populist like Long to come in because the baseline was just so low that with some very simple investments, he could really improve the quality of life for Louisianans. So this ferry actually keeps operating after the bridge comes in. It only stops in 1968, actually. So people would still use the ferry. But this bridge was really important to make it easier to get around the state. So this is what the bridge looked like. It's still in use today, of course, the old bridge. Now, some other programs he implemented were the adult literacy program. So effectively for elderly freedmen and freedwomen who had been enslaved in Louisiana, there was no effort to educate them. So overwhelmingly, elderly African Americans were illiterate. So he introduces a literacy program to try to get lower illiteracy. So Louisiana had led the nation in being the state with the most illiterates as a share of the population. By 1930, because of this program, they're only in second. But unfortunately, Long is quickly going to go to the Senate, and this program is not really given much funding. But again, this program is not that expensive, but the needs are there in the state to improve education. The other big program he did was a free textbook program, which gave textbooks to all children in the state. So if we remember, what prevented him from going to LSU, from attending university in Baton Rouge, it was the lack of free textbooks. And so you already have these programs in other states, but this was really popular to ensure that kids could go to school. Even with free public schools, kids would be deterred from attending because they couldn't afford textbooks. And so you see Long's cleverness in navigating the Louisiana political system, because he's going to give them to children attending religious schools. He goes to the Supreme Court because they say he's funding religious schools by giving them textbooks, but he argues that it goes to the children. And so the children are getting the textbooks, not the religious schools. But he's going to give this to all schools regardless of race. And so even though there's massive funding gaps between Black and white schools in Louisiana at the time, they're going to get the same textbooks as white children will get. So why did I spend so much time talking about all these investments? Well, they're really expensive. So, the taxes are pretty low in Louisiana at that time. State government is pretty small. And so Huey's going to need money to spend on all these things to build his capital, build his new mansions and so on. And so he's going to try to levy a tax on, guess who? Standard Oil and other big oil companies. And so this is going to be very unpopular. And so there's a proposal for a 5 cent per barrel tax on the production of refined oil products. And this is going to introduce a wave of opposition. So from Long's perspective, this is just big business. These are just the bad rich guys that are opposing his program. But of course, given the importance of oil for the state of Louisiana, there were a lot of workers that were affected too. Towns where there were refineries are going to be opposed to this program because it's going to hurt potentially jobs in those cities. So places like Shreveport are going to be highly anti-Long because they're involved in oil refining. And so this is going to get Huey Long impeached. So, obviously there's a lot of corruption, but this is so early that Long hadn't really accumulated many crimes that you could point to for impeachment. So a lot of these charges are trumped up. Essentially, the anti-Long opposition is trying to take him out by impeaching him. It's not really because he had serious malfeasance. It's just an attempt to block this measure. So there's lots of dirty tricks on both sides, but eventually Long is able to accumulate a third of the votes of the legislature that will, more than a third, that will say they will not vote under any circumstances for impeachment because they consider the proceedings to be illegal. And this is successful at ending the impeachment because it takes a 2/3 majority to impeach. So he's able to survive this very significant episode in Baton Rouge. But it's really going to shape him. He sees how devoted his opposition is, that even though he got a popular mandate, his political opponents are going to try to oppose his populist program, and that he needs to really fight hard because they're going to fight hard as well. So he starts to get assassination threats to kill him. People come to his house. So this is when Long is going to start using bodyguards because he's worried about assassination. Given how brilliant he is politically, it's clear that if you can assassinate Long, his political movement will be significantly hurt if you can take out one individual. So back to the Roosevelt Hotel, which we talked about in New Orleans, that he's going to use as his headquarters. So this is run by a hotel owner called Seymour Weiss, who is going to be Huey's right-hand man, one of them at least, one of his closest confidants. So Huey is going to operate out of the Roosevelt Hotel in New Orleans a lot of the time, and is not going to spend as much time in Baton Rouge unless he has to. So this is the famous deducts box, which is going to be kept in New Orleans. So Long forced all state employees, since they owed their employment to him, to kick back 5% of their salary to his political operation. So the famous deducts box was kept in the Roosevelt Hotel, so not kept in Baton Rouge. Its value had risen to $1 million at the time of Long's death, which is about over $22 million today. And this is going to disappear after his death. So according to Seymour Weiss, he asked Long where it was, and he said he couldn't find it. But in looking around, there are allegations that Seymour Weiss took the money, of course, because it's his hotel, and then invested it in some New York hotels to launder the money. But we'll never really know what happened to the deducts box. So anyway, Long's going to run for Senate in 1930. He's going to win, and you can see he's going to run on his Good Roads program that he got the money for after defeating impeachment. So once he stops the impeachment, then he's able to issue the bonds. He's able to tax and implement his program. But now he has a new problem. He's going to run for Senate. He's going to win easily because he's very popular, but he can't leave Baton Rouge. Because if he does, he's going to potentially vacate the office due to his lieutenant governor. So his lieutenant governor, Paul Cyr, is from southern Louisiana. So this is part of his method of getting votes in southern Louisiana. He's a French speaker. And so there's a dispute with Long and Cyr over Long upholding the death penalty for his friend, Thomas Dreyer. So anyway, that switches, that Paul Cyr stops being an ally of Long and becomes a hated enemy. And so whenever Long left the state, Cyr would declare himself governor. So if Long goes to the Senate, then Cyr is going to become governor and will not implement Long's program. And Long wants to continue to run the state with his allies, even when he's in the Senate. So he can't leave, even though he's elected into the Senate in 1930. And so Paul Cyr is going to try to use that to get himself into the Senate. So he gets himself sworn in October 1931. Guess where? In Shreveport, heart of anti-Long activity. So if you notice, ironically, a lot of his opposition is going to come from northern Louisiana, where Long is from. So Long is going to rush from New Orleans to Baton Rouge. So again, he should have spent more time in the capital. He's got to rush from New Orleans to make sure he keeps the capital from this attempted coup. And he's going to send in the National Guard to secure the governor's mansion in the state capital. So, Cyr is going to sue unsuccessfully, arguing that Long had already vacated the office by becoming senator, though Long never resigned. And so he's going to not be successful in that lawsuit, because guess who is nominating all the judges now? It's Huey Long. So he controls a lot of the state at this point. So the judges are going to remove Cyr as lieutenant governor, because by naming himself governor, they say he vacated the lieutenant governor's office. And so now Long can just appoint his replacement. So he's going to appoint A.O. King, who is a Long loyalist from the Louisiana legislature. And then Cyr is going to keep trying to become governor again in 1932 after Long leaves for the Senate, but he's removed easily. And eventually, even the anti-Long Democrats are going to not put him up as the anti-Long candidate for governor. So he'll just go back to being a dentist. All right, so Long then is going to leave Baton Rouge in Louisiana. He's going to go to the Senate, though he'll come back periodically, but he's still trying to build an empire in the South. So there's Caddy Haraway, who's the first woman elected in the Senate. She's the widow of another senator, Thaddeus Caraway. And so this starts the tradition of wives taking over their husband's Senate seats when they die, which would also be the case for Huey Long's wife. And so she's supposed to just be a caretaker, and then the Democratic Party will put in someone else, but she runs for re-election, and Huey Long runs from the campaigns for her as the senator from the neighboring state of Louisiana. And so she's going to win. So it shows that he has real political power outside of Louisiana to try and influence politics in neighboring states. So Long is going to filibuster. He's got several famous filibusters where he's going to read from the Bible and the Constitution. And so this filibuster is about the NRA. So this is one of the New Deal agencies that's going to distribute money in Louisiana. And so Long has a rift with FDR at this point. So he's going to be fighting with FDR. He sees FDR as too moderate, that he's not taking on the real cause of the Great Depression, which is income inequality and wealth inequality. There's too much inequality in America, and we need to redistribute wealth and income to solve the problem. So he's fighting with FDR. He wants FDR to kind of admit that, he's on the same level as the president. FDR, of course, will not do that. And so, but the filibuster here is really about the ability of the Senate to appoint administrators of these New Deal agencies. So, all these New Deal monies are going to be distributed locally. And so the Democratic Party is going to name patronage jobs for prominent Democrats to run these NRA programs. And so FDR is going to name anti-Long Democrats as the administrators, including former governors Parker and Sanders. But and so Long wants to be able to control those nominations so he can distribute the patronage job to his allies. So that's really what this filibuster is about. This is one of the famous filibusters by Long, one of the famous filibusters in Senate history. Eventually, he succumbs at 3 a.m. to his bladder, and the motion passes. So Long's continuing to fight with the president. And remember, his plan is to become president. So Long is going to announce his candidacy on August 15th, 1935. to be a candidate for president, either a Democrat or, if FDR is the nominee, as an independent. So it's pretty clear from people that have talked to him that his plan was to be a spoiler in 1936. He doesn't think he can beat FDR right away. But then FDR will lose, a Republican will win, and Huey is confident that the Republican candidate will mismanage things so badly that he can win easily in 1940. So this allegedly is his plan. But you can see that the FDR is really worried because Long is getting more fan mail than the president. He's a nationally known figure who is able to use the media. And so this is really when the conflict between Long and FDR is reaching a head. So Long is going to return to Baton Rouge. He's gotten his ally nominated as governor, O.K. Allen. So he was such a lackey of Long, he would just sign any bill Long wanted. So allegedly, they said if a leaf flew in his office, he would sign it. And so Long is still controlling Louisiana, so he's having to come back from Washington to Baton Rouge in order to pass bills. So in September 1935, he's back in the Capitol to pass a whole slew of bills, some of them, but again, he has no official position in Louisiana, but it's clear to everyone that he's still running the show. So in September, he calls a special session, which is going to block New Deal monies from being spent in the state. So he sees that the New Deal is fairly popular, especially with a Democratic state like Louisiana, hard hit by the Depression. Commodity prices for things like cotton and sugar are going to collapse in the Depression. And so the New Deal monies are really popular in the state, especially as a Democratic state. And so if Long allows FDR to spend the money locally, it's going to help FDR's presidential campaign. So he's trying to block New Deal monies from being spent in the state without his approval, without his control over them. And so, interestingly, if we think about Carl Weiss, who's going to be in the Capitol the same day as Long is shot, he's friends with Parker and Sanders, who are the former governors, and they're the ones that are appointed by FDR to administer these New Deal funds. So allegedly, the claim is that Carl Weiss is in the Capitol because his uncle is being gerrymandered, or his father-in-law is being gerrymandered out of his judgeship for being anti-Long. But I think it's possible, this is just my theory, that he could have been lobbying Long to reverse his position on the New Deal monies being spent in the state. But that's just speculation on my part. So anyway, we'll never know exactly what happened on September 8th, 1935, but it's clear that Carl Weiss is there, Huey Long is there. They're both shot fatally. Carl Weiss dies immediately and Long dies 2 days later. So he's going to pass away in Baton Rouge. And Huey Long is also going to rest in Baton Rouge. So even though he didn't always like Baton Rouge as his preferred city, he's going to spend a lot of time in other cities. His capital is there. It's really a monument to his vision for Louisiana. And it's going to serve as a kind of tombstone for his grave, even taller than the statue for him. So that's all I have today. I really appreciate your attention, and I look forward to your questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. That was very interesting. All right. So if anyone would like to ask Dr. Mathy a question, please raise your hand and I'll bring the microphone over to you so he'll be able to hear you. Okay.
I know that your specialty is macroeconomics, so I wanted you to talk about Huey Long and what he did in terms of investment in the state during the Depression. I know he tripled the state's debt, but it did stimulate our economy. And so I'd like for you to talk about that a little bit.
Well, people are going to think you're a plant because actually I have a paper on this topic. So I looked at the state spending in the Depression to try and see how much it would have stimulated the economy. So we look at, my co-author and I, Vasu Ramaswamy, we entered in all the road building projects, which parishes they were in. We looked at the tax collections, at least property taxes that we had at the parish level. And we looked at educational spending. And so we find that if you look at retail sales, so we don't have the same kind of data as today. We can't, measure income the same way or gross parish product. But if you look at how much additional retail sales, which usually corresponded, pretty closely to people's income, because they would spend at local grocery stores or, the five and dime stores, they would spend, a lot of their income at these stores. So we're able to try to estimate this, and so we find that, especially in 29 to 31, which is really the peak of his road building program, that you've got about an additional dollar of income for every dollar of spending. So it's not enormous. It's roughly commensurate with what other scholars have found. For modern period, some people find $1.70. So I think we're, within a reasonable range, maybe up to $1.30. What's interesting is we find symmetric results for taxes. So if you raise taxes by $1, you lose about an additional dollar, which is what you'd expect if you think that it's a kind of Keynesian multiplier situation. So that's what we found for the Depression, that you get about an additional dollar, maybe $1.30. Our estimates are imperfect from the spending. And so there was some improvement in Louisiana's conditions relative to other states. So also, if you look at, in the peak of the spending program from 29 to 31, if you look at Louisiana compared to other similar states like Mississippi or Arkansas, you find that the income decline in the Depression is smaller in Louisiana. So I think these are reasonable results to think about these investments. Now, we could also think about the long run investments. You've got the direct impact from spending because you're hiring construction workers, hiring teachers, and so on, hiring faculty at LSU. But we could also look at the long-term investments. You're investing in the people of Louisiana. With roads, you can run trucks. It's going to make it easier to run businesses. And with education, you're investing in the people of Louisiana. They can get better jobs with better education. So that's our next project, is to kind of think about the long-run impact of these programs.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Mathy. And we have another question.
Of course, we all know that Carl Weiss has been viewed as the assassin of Huey Long, but I have read a number of books and statements that said that FDR was behind it because of Long's rising popularity. Do you know anything about that? Can you speak on that?
So when we discussed with the old state capitol, they said to focus on Huey's life and a bit of the happier times. It is striking that Long would be assassinated coincidentally, as he's such a threat to FDR. It does seem that the assassins end up doing pretty well. So if you look at Seymour Weiss, he's if you look at the bodyguards, they're going to get nice jobs on the dock board after the assassination. And his entire political machine is going to make peace with Roosevelt. So then Roosevelt is going to send lots of New Deal monies to Louisiana, because now, the political machine doesn't have the same opposition to the president. So they quickly make peace. They're happy to get all those patronage jobs. They don't have the same vision of, populist Louisiana like Huey Long does. And so then it works out very nicely for both the Roosevelt administration and Huey Long's political machine. But of course, there's no direct evidence linking them. But I will just say it seems coincidental that it works out very well for everyone involved there.
Thank you, Dr. Mathy. And do we have any other questions from anybody? Oh.
So you mentioned Huey Long and his fight with Big Oil, and oddly enough, he had an oil company.
Yes.
So talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so it's not directly related to Baton Rouge, but there's the famous win or lose oil company. And so you can see some of the contradictions with Long. I mean, he's clearly not anti-capitalist in that he doesn't like people getting rich. And a lot of his political allies are not the big business, but they're kind of prominent businessmen like Seymour Weiss, right? Like they're not as wealthy as Standard Oil, but Seymour Weiss is a very wealthy man owning several hotels. Noe is an oil man, James Noe, who's going to be a political ally and involved with the Win or Lose Oil Corporation. And allegedly, what first sets off Huey with Standard Oil is that he strikes some oil, and Standard Oil won't run it down their pipelines. So this is another reason why he may have been so opposed to Standard Oil. But it's clear that Long is going to get this Win or Lose Oil money. And allegedly, according to Elmer Irie, who took down Capone for the Treasury, right? He got him on tax evasion. So they were also looking into Long. And according to Irie, at least, he had secured an indictment for federal charges for the Win or Lose Oil Corporation for Huey Long on the day before he was assassinated. So again, the coincidences are kind of incredible here. But once he's assassinated, all those charges go away. But allegedly, they had violated tax laws in the same way as Al Capone did for the Win or Lose Oil Corporation. Now, there were also, the state laws, which it doesn't seem like they violated, not because it wasn't corrupt, but just because this kind of corruption wasn't illegal. So, the state charges, I think it's hard to prosecute for the Win or Lose Oil Corporation, but all the federal charges are going to go away after the assassination. And so the Long family is still profiting from those today. If you compare, LSU did very well in Long's era, but he didn't endow them with the same kind of oil revenues that a state like Texas did. And so, Texas and UT Austin is going to benefit from the oil, while Huey Long took it for himself. And so, that's really boosted UT Austin's ability to become a top university and stay a top university. Well, LSU didn't do that. None of the oil wealth was put forth as some kind of long-term sovereign wealth fund to fund the state, which was done in other states. So, I think this is a real contradiction that, Long really failed in many ways to set up the state with these kind of long-term revenues. Instead, he was profiting personally from the oil.
Thank you. Oh, we have one more over here.
Thank you. Just following on that previous question, do you think that Huey Long's populist programs, his spending and taxation policies would have been possible if we'd been more like Mississippi, a state without the same kind of oil and gas resources and without the refining industry to go along with it?
Yeah, so it was mentioned before that Huey's going to triple the debt. So he's not really a Keynesian, he's not spending to try and lift Louisiana out of the Depression. He just wants to spend. And he's not able to raise the revenue immediately. So he's going to raise some taxes in order to finance the bond. So the way it would work at the time is, you issue a bond, you're going to have trouble selling it unless you can have dedicated revenue. And so they pass taxes that would then pay off the bonds over time. So he's going to implement things like gas taxes, other taxes like that. So there are taxes on the refining, but a lot of it is going to go through things like gas taxes, which places like Mississippi are going to implement as well. And so Louisiana is going to be ahead a bit with Huey Long, but you don't want to overstate it because the other states are going to catch up. So the other states are eventually going to build highways. They're going to invest in their public universities in the 20th century and so on. And so I haven't finished the project on the long-term impact of Long, but it doesn't really seem like there's much of a long-term impact. So if you look at illiteracy in 1950, Louisiana's back to being number one. It's worse than Mississippi. Mississippi is close behind. But I can't really find much lasting benefit for Louisiana from this oil wealth relative to a similar state like Mississippi. Whereas I think, a state like Texas seems to have managed it better in terms of, raising its income per person, becoming more developed economically.
Do we have any more questions? Well, please, let's give a round of applause to Professor Mathy. Thank you so much. This was awesome.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.
You need to know that we have the biggest crowd here that we've had in a long time.
Oh, wonderful.
So congratulations to you.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry. Oh, Professor Mathy is in Washington, D.C.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
He's at American University.
That's right. Yes.
Yes.